Have you ever wondered why some countries, or even companies, just seem to make the same mistakes over and over again? Well, today we're digging into that exact idea, institutional inertia, through a really fascinating and critical analysis of why some systems just don't seem to learn. So let's start with a really provocative thought. What if a nation's apparent failure isn't a failure at all? What if, and stick with me here, it's actually perfected the art of managing its own backwardness, turning what looks like a problem into a stable, functional system, at least for the people in charge?
Okay, so to even begin to unpack that idea, we first need to look at the standard explanation for Portugal's historical lag behind its European neighbors.
So you've got the economist Nuno Palma, who offers a really solid diagnosis in his work. He basically argues that the country's problems aren't about some vague cultural flaw or just bad luck. No, he says they stem from centuries of very specific political choices that built extractive, rent-seeking institutions.
But here's the thing. While Palma's historical diagnosis is really strong, it tells us what went wrong. It leaves this huge, and let's be honest, kind of embarrassing question just hanging in the air.
And this right here is the heart of the puzzle. If the problems are so well diagnosed, why on earth does a pattern of failure just keep repeating itself? Why is there no real correction, no institutional learning? It's like watching generation after generation get super excited about reinventing the square wheel. All right, so to answer that question, the analysis we're looking at today proposes this really powerful toolkit, 3 different lenses to look at this problem of non-learning. Let's break them down. The first lens comes from the philosopher Karl Popper, and it's a simple but really profound idea. Can your institutions actually admit when they're wrong? Is there a way to correct course when things go south? Because think about it. If a system can't be proven wrong by failure, well, it simply can't learn. End of story. Okay, lens number 2 comes from the physicist David Deutsch, and this one is all about the quality of our ideas. Are our explanations for our problems actually good? Are they what he calls hard to vary, or are they just these, chameleon narratives, these vague stories that can twist and change to justify any failure, no matter what? And the third lens from Nassim Nicholas Taleb asks a really pointed question. Do the people in charge actually feel the pain when their decisions fail? If there's no skin in the game, as he calls it, is there any real incentive to get it right in the first place? Now, what's so brilliant here is how these 3 ideas aren't separate. They lock together. You can see how they form this coherent system. Look, you can't learn from your errors if you don't have better explanations for what went wrong. But nobody's going to bother looking for better explanations if there's no personal price to pay for failure. It's a perfect model for how institutions should learn, and in this case, a perfect explanation for why they don't. So, let's apply this framework to Portugal's history. It really shines a light on this repeating, almost self-sustaining pattern. The analysis points to this cycle across 3 totally different eras. You had 19th century liberalism, where the fancy new rhetoric was adopted, but the old extractive systems just kept chugging along. Then, under the Estado Novo dictatorship, stagnation didn't lead to a rethink of the model. It just led to doubling down. And even joining the EU, where external funds created this illusion of success that just kicked the can down the road on necessary reforms. In every single case, failure led to new words, but the bad institutions, they stayed. And, this isn't just a political failure, it's a cognitive one. The great poet Fernando Pessoa actually had a name for this: Portuguese provincialism. It's this tendency to just import the vocabulary of reform from other places instead of doing the hard work of developing real, original solutions based on homegrown knowledge. And that brings us right to the absolute core of the problem: risk. The source text uses a metaphor for this that is, well, it's just perfect. Just think about it for a second. The system is set up to protect its decision makers from the consequences of their own mistakes. They can risk the entire aircraft, the whole country, because they know their personal evacuation jet is always on standby. If you have no fear of the crash, what incentive is there to learn how to fly the plane better? So here's the crucial takeaway. This lack of personal responsibility, this total absence of skin in the game, is what props up the entire non-learning system. Error isn't a lesson. It's just a bill that gets handed to the public while the people who made the mistake just move on, completely unscathed. And all of this creates this perfect, self-perpetuating closed loop. It starts with number 1, no skin in the game for the elites. That leads to number 2, since there's no penalty for failure, there's no reason to find better, more robust explanations for problems. And that brings us to 3, With these weak, flexible narratives in place, the system becomes immune to ever correcting its core mistakes. It is a perfect machine for not learning.
Okay, so where does all this leave us? Well, this whole analysis brings us to a really uncomfortable final thought, right back to that question we started with.
The analysis is basically suggesting that what we call Portuguese backwardness isn't some accident or a recurring mistake. It's a feature, not a bug. It's a system that works. It's a stable, actively reproduced equilibrium that, sure, is costly for the country as a whole, but it's perfectly stable and, frankly, beneficial for those who manage it.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative question. What if the goal is no longer to solve the problem of backwardness, but to simply manage it with more and more sophistication? Has the problem itself stopped being a problem to solve and instead become an asset to be preserved? It's a challenging thought for sure, but it's one this entire framework forces us to confront.